Hi, everybody, it's Marlene. And as promised before, I told you I was going to start doing separate episodes for news of the unusual, strange things, strange happenings. And this is the first episodes done strictly with that in mind. As a matter of fact, from now on, you can find this at eerie.news, EERIE.news. Okay, where I'm going to be posting 2, 3, 4 interesting articles and pieces about things, weird things, things that are happening now. And again, this is unusual things. It could be paranormal, it could be true crime, it could be just anything that falls under the umbrella of unusual. And as you know, that could mean a lot of things depending on your definition of unusual. But anyway, let's start with a recent discovery. All right. This is something that happened, I want to say 4 days ago. 4 days ago. This was a discovery of the ship called Endurance, which, by the way, the discovery of this ship coincides with the 100-year anniversary of Sir Shackleton's burial. In case you didn't know, he was the person that he was a very famous explorer, and he was the one that organized this trip of exploration to Antarctica around 1915 to 1916. But let me tell you how interesting this is, because it was just more than just finding a shipwreck. And contrary to what people think, when you think of shipwreck as like, oh, was there some type of, treasure involved? No, there was no treasure involved. Well, it depends. Maybe it's what do you consider treasure? Because let's take a look at what went on with this gentleman. This right here is Sir Ernest Shackleton. All right, he died a very young man, by the way. He died when he was only 47 years old. All right. And let me give you a little bit of the background as to what happened with his discovery. First of all, the Endurance was found 4 miles from where her captain, Frank Worsley, reported her going down in 1915. It wasn't only the loss of the ship which made this endeavor so famous, but the tribulations the crew had to endure in order to reach safety. Cross Antarctica from the Weddell Sea via the South Pole to the Ross Seal. This was Sir Ernest Shackleton's dream. He sailed in 1912 from Norway with a crew of 27 men. The year before, Roald Amundsen's expedition was the first to successfully reach the South Pole. Supplies were left on Ross Island at Hut Point. The outpost was built in 1902 during the National Antarctic Expedition led by Robert Falcon Scott. And I'll explain later towards the end. These were the years of what has been referred to as the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. This lasted from the mid to end 19th century till after World War I. This is why there were so many expeditions. By the way, there was not everybody, ships and people and crew made it out, because it was a very harsh climate to explore. Now, Shackleton set out with his ship, the Endurance. However, he had anticipated that the ice was not going to be as dense as it turned out to be. In other words, nature was not on their side. The ice was denser than normal, and the Endurance became trapped on the Weddell Sea in January 1915. And as you can imagine, January 1915 in the Antarctic was very, very cold. It was, for lack of a better word, you really had to have an adventurous spirit to want to do this. You really had to have an adventurous spirit to put up with all the vicissitudes that you were going to encounter. And the reason why I'm saying this is that I think that, sometimes that spirit of adventure, or I don't know what to call it, exploration, sometimes is, you don't find it as easy. I mean, everybody's, I think, too comfortable being inside. And but once upon a time, and believe it or not, when they were going out there, they knew that they were going to endure very, very difficult circumstances, very difficult circumstances. So to continue with the story about this discovery, all right. So here they are. The Endurance becomes trapped on the ice, and a month later, Shackleton converts the ship to a winter station since he realizes he's going to be stuck there. The ship is going to be stuck at least till spring. The ice was so thick that even under steam power, it couldn't make headways. So they turned off the engines so that they could conserve coal and just let the vessel drift along for hundreds of miles. Now, sure enough, warmer temperatures come in and it released the ship, but it put extreme pressure on the hull. And then in July, a gale pushed ice into the ship's hull. And 3 months later, Shackleton had to abandon it, moving 3 lifeboats and supplies to the ice. And it sank on November 21st. Now, you have to understand, even though Shackleton was heading the expedition, he was not the captain. He had a separate person who was the captain. Now, including him, there was a total of 28 men, and they camped on the ice floes that drifted northward, living on seal and sled dog meat. Yes, sled dog meat. Because they had taken 70 dogs with them for the expedition. They stayed 2 months on the ice floe, hoping to reach Paulet Island, which was 250 miles away, and they knew there was a cache of supplies there. However, the icy landscape was so inhospitable that they couldn't reach their destination. Then in April, all right, now remember, this is going into year 2 that they're stuck out there. In April, the ice released them and they traveled in open boats. When I mean open boats, rowboats, 20-foot rowboats, to Elephant Island, which is at the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. However, the chance of being rescued was unlikely since the island was far from any shipping routes. Now think about this. What does that tell you? When you have to think that, I mean, how, wow, what can I say? To me, Antarctic is remote, period. Now, can you imagine when you are thinking, this is remote within the remote? That's kind of concerning because you could tell that they're remember they've eaten probably their supplies. They've gone through their dogs, and I guess if they're able to find seals to eat, but at some point, and with how harsh and cold it was, they knew they had to make it someplace. So what Shackleton does, him and 5 other men make an 800-mile trip on the lifeboat that James carried, and they head to a spot called South Georgia, and from there he's left a little bit over 20 men back on Elephant Island, and he's hoping that he can get to the other side. Where they landed was very remote once they finally get there. Now, he takes 3 men, and he crosses what's called the Allardyce Range, which is a mountainous range that ran along the spine of the island. They had no map, and what they were hoping to is that they're going to reach a whaling station at a place called Stromness. They did, and they arrived on May 20th, 1916, and immediately he organized a rescue effort for the men on the other side of the island, and then the other ones, he sent them to Elephant Island. However, it took, believe it or not, 3 months to pick up the men that were left on Elephant Island. But fortunately, they made it home without loss of life. Now, Sir Shackleton, upon his return, publishes his memoirs of the expedition, and he tours on a lecture circuit. However, he got tired of it. And in 1920, he starts thinking about another expedition. The destination he originally had in mind was the Arctic in the area of the Beaufort Sea, which was largely unexplored. And a former schoolmate provided funds to him so that he could buy a ship called the Phoca 1, and which he renamed the Quest. Then he changed his goal and decided to try to circumnavigate the Antarctic continent, including finding the lost islands such as Taranaki. The expedition left September of 1921, and believe it or not, many of his former crew from the Endurance sailed with their former, they called him boss, even though not all of them had gotten pay from that expedition. They arrived in Rio de Janeiro, and it's suspected that Shackleton had had a heart attack, but he refused a medical examination, and the ship, the Quest, continued on to South Georgia and arrived January 4th, 1922. A few hours after midnight, Dr. Macklin, the expedition physician, was called to Shackleton's cabin. And by now what's happening is Shackleton is complaining of back pains. He feels uncomfortable. In other words, something's going on. Now, as it turns out, this same doctor, Dr. Macklin, had accompanied him on a prior expedition a few years back. And so, in other words, he was familiar with Shackleton. And he later on, Macklin wrote in his diary that he had reminded Shackleton that, I've told you that you need to lead a quote-unquote regular life. And Shackleton asked, you're always wanting me to give up things. What is it I ought to give up? And the doctor answered, chiefly alcohol, boss. On January 5th, 1922, at 2:50 a.m., Shackleton died from a heart attack. His wife, Emily, with whom he had 3 children, gave instructions because they were heading back to Britain with his remains. She gave instructions that her husband should be buried in South Georgia instead of Britain. And on March 5th, 1922, he was buried at Kripviken Cemetery, which is exactly 100 years after the discovery of the ship, is 100 years to the date of his burial in South Georgia. Now, Eric Marshall, he was a medical officer on another expedition from 1907 to 1909. They were on board the ship, the Nimrod. He had made a note in his diary that Shackleton suffered a congenital heart defect known as hole in the heart. Well, this is what they referred to it back then. We now know it as atrial septal defect. This, possibly paired with a strain of the trip, caused his death, again, at the age of 47. When he passed away, Shackleton was heavily in debt, and he left his small estate to his widow, who died 14 years later in 1936. Now, what's really unusual is the effort to find the Endurance was set up by a group called the Endurance 22 Expedition. And they tried to locate the vessel back in 2019 with an unmanned sub, which ended up being trapped under the ice, and with temperatures dipping negative 18 degrees Celsius, that attempt ended in failure. And then, 3 years later, fast forward to 2022, Lady Luck is with him, and the ship was located 2 miles below the surface of the Weddell Sea. And in a strange twist, again, it coincided with his burial, which is, you could say, what are the chances of that? Now, according to the New York Times, this endeavor of finding the Endurance cost more than $10 million, and the expedition was covered by an anonymous donor, which was unusual because most of the time you know exactly who's on whose dime things like this are done. Now, from the last years of the 19th century until the end of World War I, this became known as the heroic age of Antarctic exploration, and many ships and lives were lost, and in Antarctic crossings, the HMS Terror and Erebus, among others. And I'm going to get into that in just a minute because I'm sure you saw that. I want to say it was about 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I think it was AMC. They put out a special about the HMS Terror and Erebus. Now, the Endurance is going to remain on the seafloor, protected by the Antarctic Treaty as a history monument. What that means is that no artifacts can be removed. And they were noting that because the weather there is so cold, not the weather, I'm sorry, the seawater is so cold, the temperatures are so cold that bacteria that usually will eat wood doesn't exist. So the ship has been there for 100 years and the wood is still intact. The gilt lettering, that's how sure they are that this is the Endurance, that the gilt lettering on the back of the ship is still there, the gold leaf. You can see it perfectly. All right. It's very interesting. But let's go on to that we were talking about the what happened with the Erebus and what they called the Terror. I'm thinking to myself, how did you come up with a name like that for a ship? It's like, think about it. Would you want to sail in a ship called the Terror? I don't know. Maybe it was a different time back then. But I mean, I've seen some of these ships, when they would name them, that they would just have some very, very unusual names. But something like the Terror, I'd be like, I don't know if I want to get on that. All right, let's see. Let's see if we could. Let's see, Erebus. All right, there we go. This, of course, are the times of. I'm not sure if this is what they're called. If they're called clipper ships, I'm not that familiar. But anyway, it's the mid-19th century, and explorers all hope to make history. Such was the case when Sir John Franklin organized an Arctic expedition in 1845. The aim was to navigate the Northwest Passage. They sailed with 3 years' worth of food and 134 men on board. The HMS Erebus were trapped in ice off King William Island, which failed to melt during 2 succeeding summers. All right. In other words, this wasn't even like what happened with the Endurance, that at least they waited out, and when the warm weather came in, the ice opened up and they were able to go somewhere. In 1859, a letter dated 1848 was found under a cairn in Canada's Victoria Point. It was written by Francis Crozier, who took command of the Terror after Admiral Franklin died. He noted that 24 men perished and the rest of the crew were heading out in hopes of reaching a trading post hundreds of miles away. They all died along the way. The British Navy sent out search parties, but not until 1850 did they stumble on an unexpected clue of what happened to the expedition. On uninhabited beachy island, 3 unmarked graves dating to 1846 were found. Okay, let me see if I can find the and again, it's incredible what happens when the weather, everything that comes in warm weather is not present. Let's see. This is part of what they've found. This is the remains of John Torrington. Now, John Torrington, again, because remember, unlike the Endurance, there were no survivors. There was nobody that came back to tell them this is what happened to the crew, So anyway, they, like I said, eventually, when they realized after years, because that, in other words, because remember, traveling to and from, and this was a slow motion thing compared to now. So in 1850, the British Navy, they stumbled on an unexpected clue on Beachy Island. I don't know if that's a correct pronunciation. And they found 3 unmarked graves dating to 1846. Then in 1854, a Scottish explorer came across Inuit in Pelly Bay who had some of the belongings of the Franklin crew. They told of piles of bones scattered in the area, some of them cracked in half, which indicated the men had fed on each other before they froze to death. During the 1980s and 1990s, further research was conducted on remains found on King William Island, which showed knife marks. Not only did they eat their fellow crew members, they didn't wait for them to die, but killed them, driven by the throes of hunger. In 1984, one of the bodies buried on Beach Island, which is that picture that you're seeing on the screen, was exhumed from under 5 feet of permafrost. He was found to be in pristine condition. John Torrington, age 20, died on January 1st, 1846. He was neither killed nor cannibalized. He weighed only 88 pounds, indicating he was malnourished. He had deadly levels of lead inside his body. Possibly the crew's canned food was poorly packaged and became poisonous. The 3 corpses found on Beach Island remain buried there to this day. The Erebus was discovered in 2014 in 36 feet of water off King William Island, and the HMS Terror was found 2 years later in Terror Bay, 45 miles away from the Erebus. Why the ship separated is unknown. Another mystery is why the Terror sunk, since there was no breach in the hull and it wasn't crushed by ice. It appeared to have sunk swiftly and suddenly and settled gently to the bottom. What happened? Good question. What happened? But see, that's one of those things that like with the Endurance, that's the thing, those ice chunks, they could basically decimate the hull of a ship. So let's go on to what I consider one of the most interesting parts, all having to do with this story. And it's like there's a lot of ships, especially back in those times, because now we have search beacons and GPS and God knows. I mean, if you don't have a GPS, they have satellites. There's a million ways that they can find you. That doesn't mean they always do, but in other words, there's different ways to how can I say it, to at least narrow down where to search for you, if that's the case. Even though now this is like I said, these are older stories of what happened to ships that and there's my, yes, that is my, for people ask me, man, what is that? That is my text reminder. Okay. Which is what I use to know. That's how I know that I've got an important message, because otherwise, if I do the little rinky-dink reminder for text messages, I just ignore it. But anyway, let's get back to the good part, which is what happened to all these ships that basically they disappeared and there was nobody around to say one way or the other what happened to them. Okay, this is these stories come from the site Mental Floss. All right. Okay, the first one that we're looking at is a ship called the Patriot. All right, now this had to do with a lady by the name of Theodosia Burr Alston. She was the daughter of American Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr, which, by the way, he himself had his own notoriety because he was involved in a duel with Alexander Hamilton, and Alexander Hamilton got the short end of the stick over a woman, of course. Anyway, Theodosia had a privileged upbringing, good education. In 1801, she married a wealthy landowner, Joseph Alston, who went on to become governor of South Carolina. However, in 1812, she lost her only son to a fever, and she became sick with grief. Desperate for a change of scene, on New Year's Eve 1812, she boarded the schooner Patriot in South Carolina to visit her father in New York. It is known that the ship left dock and sailed north, but what happened after that is a mystery. It never arrived in New York, and no trace of the ship or crew was ever found. A number of theories and legends have sprung up around the fate of Theodosia. Some claim the ship was attacked by pirates and that she was forced to walk the plank, while others suggest that the Patriot got caught up in the War of 1812 and was sunk accidentally by an enemy ship. Perhaps most fanciful of all is a story put forward by a Karankawa Indian chief who claimed that he rescued a woman who had washed up on shore after shipwreck, and that before she died, she gifted him her locket with the name Theodosia inscribed upon it. Whatever the story, it is likely that after more than 200 years, we shall never know the real fate of the Patriot and Theodosia Burr-Alston. No kidding. A second ship that fell off the face of the earth was called the Merchant Royal. The Merchant Royal was tasked with taking treasures from the New World to Spain under the command of one Captain John Limbre. In 1641, the ship was loaded with 100,000 pounds of gold, 400 bars of Mexican silver, and a huge amount of precious jewels. As the ship entered the English waters, the weather turned bad, but unfortunately the pumps on board the ship broke, and it began to take on water. Its sister ship, the Dover Merchant, with whom it had been sailing in tandem, came to the rescue of the captain and crew, but were unable to take any of the cargo. The ship disappeared beneath the waves somewhere off the coast of Land's End. Of course, with such valuable cargo, countless people have attempted to find the wreck, which has become known as the El Dorado of the seas. In 2007, it was thought that Odyssey Marine Exploration may have found the wreck after it salvaged 500,000 pieces of gold and silver from a site off the southwestern tip of Great Britain. This was later identified as a treasure from a Spanish vessel, meaning that the unimagined riches of the Merchant Royal still await discovery. Alrighty then. Next ship, the USS Cyclops. This was a huge steel-hulled fuel ship tasked with carrying coal and other useful supplies for the U.S. Navy in the 1910s. On her final journey, the Cyclops set sail from Rio de Janeiro with a full load of 10,800 tons of manganese ore and over 300 people on board. On March 4th, 1918, the ship was spotted for the last time as it left Barbados and sailed into what we now sometimes call the Bermuda Triangle. The ship seemingly disappeared without a trace, and the case has been seen as especially mysterious since no distress call was made and no bad weather was reported in the region. Theories began to surface, some more imaginative than others, that the ship had been sunk by the Germans, attacked by a giant squid or octopus, or even being a victim of a violent mutiny. A huge search for the Cyclops was launched with a number of boats and planes scouring the area for debris or survivors, but nothing of the enormous ship was ever seen again. Next ship, the Witchcraft. On December 22nd, 1967, experienced yachtsman Dan Burak and his friend, Father Patrick Horgan, set sail in the 23-foot luxury yacht Witchcraft to see the holiday lights off the coast of Miami. That's funny. A priest on a yacht called the Witchcraft. Unfortunately, after just 1 mile, the pair experienced difficulty when it seemed as if the yacht had hit something. Burak calmly called the Miami Coast Guard to report the trouble and request assistance. The official who took the call later commented that Burak seemed unconcerned, perhaps because the yacht was fitted with a special flotation device that was supposed to make the vessel unsinkable. Yeah, I heard something like that about another ship called the Titanic. All right, anyway. The Coast Guard arrived at the scene just 19 minutes after the call and were surprised to find no trace of the large yacht, no debris, and no sign of Burak or Horgan. Over the next 6 days, hundreds of square miles of ocean were searched, but nothing was ever found, and the Witchcraft has been chalked up as another vessel mysteriously lost to the Bermuda Triangle. Next ship, Andrea Gale. The Andrea Gale was a 70-foot-long liner boat that fished in the North Atlantic for swordfish. In September 1991, the ship, along with several other fishing vessels, set sail from Gloucester, Massachusetts, for the last fishing session of the season. By October, the Andrea Gale and its 6-man crew was cut off the coast of Newfoundland when the confluence of terrible weather fronts conspired to create what has been dubbed the perfect storm. They made a movie about this. The massively powerful winds were whipping waves as high as 100 feet, and any ship caught in their path faced being sucked into the wave and flipped over repeatedly. The devastating storm battered the coast of New England and Canada, and after the worst of it had passed and the Andrea Gale had failed to return to port, a number of rescue missions set out to find the ship, but nothing was ever found. The story of the storm and the imagined fate of the Andrea Gale and her crew was later told in the book The Perfect Storm by Sebastian Junger, as well as a Hollywood movie the same name. There you go. Next ship, the USS Porpoise. The Porpoise was a brig involved in 19th century exploration and surveying missions, taking part in a voyage in 1838 that confirmed the existence of Antarctica. Here we go. And later circumnavigating the globe. In 1854, the ship set sail from Hong Kong, carrying 69 men in order to carry out a survey of the South Sea Islands, somewhere between China and Taiwan. The ship sailed into dense fog and was separated from its partner ship, the USS Vincennes, and never seen again. Many ships searched for the ill-fated brig for over a year, but no sign was ever found. It's thought to have been wrecked in a typhoon with all hands lost. Next ship, the HMS Sappho. Over the course of a 20-year career, the British Navy ship HMS Sappho worked to suppress the slave trade off the coast of West Africa, intercepting a number of ships loaded with slaves and freeing hundreds of people. In 1857, after wrongly chasing down and boarding an American ship, an event that caused something of a diplomatic crisis between America and Great Britain, the ship was ordered to set sail to Australia. The Sappho reached Cape Town without incident, and from there headed towards the Bass Strait, where it was last spotted by a passing brig on February 18, 1878. Bad weather was reported in the area, and it had been assumed that high winds caused the ship to founder and sink. No sign of the 147 crew members was ever found, but rumors abounded that the captain, Fairfax Moresby, had somehow escaped the wreck and made it to an island off Australia where he was said to have lost his mind. Let me see. Let's see if I can find this one. It's called the Bachimo. This is a more modern. Let me see if we can find images of the Bachimo. Okay. I'll tell you the story of the Bachimo. Because, I take that back, contrary to everything. Even more modern times, people and ships can just disappear. We have nothing left. All right, let's see. Oh boy, here we go. All right, the SS Bachimo started life as a German trading vessel before being given to Great Britain after World War I as part of reparations. Okay. The Bachimo came under the ownership of the Hudson Bay Company and made many voyages across the Atlantic from Scotland to Canada to trade with local Inuit tribes. In 1931, while journeying to Vancouver with a cargo of furs, the Bachimo fell victim to an early winter as ice floes surrounded the ship and locked it in an icy embrace. The crew escaped the stricken vessel and fled across the ice floes to safety, but some returned a few days later to try to rescue the ship and its valuable cargo. After over a month of braving the treacherous weather in a flimsy camp, a huge blizzard hit and the remaining crew lost sight of the ship. Once the storm had cleared, the watching crew were surprised to find the Bachimo had disappeared. They assumed it had sunk without trace. A week later, the ship was spotted by an Inuit hunter, and the crew raced back on board to gather as much of the cargo as possible. The captain decided the ship was too badly damaged to be seaworthy, and so abandoned it, thinking it would soon break apart. How wrong he was. Over the years, the Bachimo was sighted a number of times, sometimes caught fast in ice, other times floating ghost-like through the Arctic waters. The last confirmed sighting was in 1969, an astonishing 37 years after it had been abandoned to its fate. Okay, I guess that captain really... Talk about a ghost ship. That really was a ghost ship. All right, guys, I hope you like this extended little snippet of news and, what's behind it, and lost ships, etc., etc. And, I mean, I could go into some other stuff, which maybe I'll do the next time. having to do with Antarctica. You know, there's a lot of mysteries and, you know, what they say, a lot of cover-ups having to do with Antarctica. And it was even mentioned several times by Edgar Casey. But that'll be for another day. Hopefully soon. So, again, come back. If in the meantime you want to go ahead and sign up to get the stories directly in your email, just go to eerie.news, and you can sign up there. Otherwise, if you want to do this version, I will see you soon. Take care.